Hello, today we are going to finish up the examples in section 3.2. So picking up where we left off, it says solve each of the following equations for y. Give your answers using function notation, letting y equals f of x. So just to recall what we did earlier in this section, we were solving what were called literal equations. And they specify for me in this type of equation what variable it is that I need to solve for. So we're essentially rearranging the equation. And in this set of examples, we also want to incorporate what we know about function notation. So in our final answer, instead of writing y, we're going to replace it with f of x. Okay, so in my first example, I have 2x minus 5y equals 10. Now remember, keeping our eye on the prize, we are trying to get this y by itself. So the very first thing we need to do is subtract 2x from both sides. Now, keep in mind that when I do that, I end up with negative 5y on the left-hand side of the equation. And on the right-hand side, I cannot combine 10 and 2x. So I simply write out 10 minus 2x. All right, we're still trying to get that y by itself. Remember, the negative 5 and the y are connected by multiplication. And to undo multiplication, we have to divide by negative 5. All right, so this leaves us with now y equals 10 over negative 5 is going to simplify to a negative 2. And then a negative over a negative simplifies to a positive, so we'll have plus 2/5 x. Final answer based on the directions for these problems is going to be f of x, because remember we have to use that function notation, equals negative 2 plus 2/5 x. Now keep in mind, a lot of times when we try to rearrange equations like this that are linear equations, we end up putting them in the form y equals mx plus b. So if you want to, you could put f of x equals 2/5 x minus 2. That would be equivalent. All right, next up is 5y over 7 equals x. So again, we're trying to get that y by itself. This time we have a fraction. Think back to section 3.1 where we were dealing a lot with fractions and we learned that method to get rid of those fractions using cross reduction. Because I have a 7 in the denominator, I want to multiply both sides of this equation by 7. What that's going to allow us to do is cross reduce over on the left-hand side, and I'm going to end up with 1 times 5y, which is just 5y, and on the right-hand side, I have equals 7x. All right, only thing left to get rid of in front of that y is my 5. It's connected by multiplication, so I'm going to undo that with division. So I need to divide by 5. And we end up with y equals 7/5 x. Not quite done though, because remember the directions specifically here tell me to use function notation. So I need f of x equals 7/5 x. All right, one more in this section. We have 8x equals 2 pi y. Now, keep in mind that in this particular equation where I'm trying to get y by itself, it is connected to the 2 and the 2 pi by multiplication. And again, you're probably going to get tired of me saying it. In order to undo multiplication, we're going to use division. So we need to divide by 2 pi, which we can do all at once. And this is going to leave me with 8x over 2 pi equals y. Now, while this is not incorrect, we haven't simplified it yet. We want to make sure that 8 over 2 gets reduced to 4. So we are going to end up with 4x over pi equals y. And then in that final step, we're going to use our function notation. We have 4x over pi equals f of x. You're also welcome in that final answer to write it as f of x equals 4x over pi. Same thing. All right, now in the next several examples, we are going to be looking at writing equations based from word problems that are given to us. And in that process, we are going to have to figure out what our variable is. We're going to write that equation, and then we're going to solve it. So this first question says, a number divided by 8 equals the number increased by 2. Find the number. Now, I have students that try to use guess and check on these types of problems a lot, which usually isn't going to work out too well for you. So you really want to make sure that you dissect this sentence. All right, so first thing we want to look at is a number. If we do not know the number, we're going to use a variable. So let's call it x. All right, then we have divided by. So we're going to have division, and it's divided by 8. Okay. Then we have equals, which of course is an equal sign. We have the number again, which we define as x, and it's increased by 2. When we increase by 2, we are adding, and then we have this number 2. We need to find the number. All right, so let's write out that equation that we just came up with. We have x divided by 8 equals x plus 2. Now, to be honest, I usually don't write my division symbol like this when I'm writing out an equation. I did while we dissected that sentence, but really remember division can be represented by a fraction bar. So let's write this as x over 8 equals x plus 2. Okay. So we've got to solve this equation now. We have a fraction, and we've learned that in order to get rid of those fractions, we can multiply by our least common denominator, which by default in this case is going to be 8. So let's multiply by 8. That's going to allow us to cross-reduce here. And we will be left with 1 times x, which is just x, equals 8 times the quantity x plus 2. All right, in this next step, let's go ahead and distribute. So we have x equals 8x plus 16. Now remember, when we're solving equations, the ultimate goal is to isolate that x, that variable in this problem. And so we need to get all those variables onto one side. You can put them to either side, but I mentioned in class the other day, I always like to put my variables on the left. So let's go ahead and subtract 8x, moving all my x's over to the left-hand side of the equation. This will give me, remember this is a 1x minus 8x, so we're going to end up with a negative 7x equals 16. Very last step, that negative 7 and x are connected by multiplication, so we need to divide by negative 7. And we end up with x equals negative 16 sevenths. So if you're trying to use that guess and check approach, I definitely don't think you would have magically come up with negative 16 sevenths on your own. So you really want to make sure you're working through that process of writing out an equation and using the steps we've learned to solve that equation. All right, next up, we want to find the sum of 3 consecutive integers, that is 36. Find the integers. All right, so we know that we need a sum, and remember that sum means addition, so we know we're adding, and we have 3 consecutive integers. Now, we don't know what those integers are, so we are going to have to use a variable. Let's stick with x. You can use any variable you want, though. And they have to be consecutive. So let's think about what this means. Consecutive means in a row, so like 7, 8, 9 would be 3 consecutive integers. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 15, 16, 17. In order for us to get 3 consecutive integers, we first have to start out with x. To get the next consecutive integer, we have to add 1 to it, so it would be x plus 1. And to get that third consecutive integer, we have to add another 1 to it, so we're really adding 2, so it would be x plus 2. All right, I just got to notice that we got disconnected, so hopefully we're back on track. So I had 3 consecutive integers. I had x, x plus 1, and x plus 2. So that sequence gives me consecutive integers. And it says is 36. That word is in math means equals, and then we know it's going to equal 36. All right, so those 3 consecutive integers that I just came up with have to be added. So I'm going to have x plus x plus 1 plus x plus 2 equals 36. If it helps you visualize this, remember x is our first integer, x plus 1 is that second integer, and x plus 2 is that third integer, and we're adding them up. Now, on that left-hand side, though, we have some like terms we can combine. X, and x is actually going to give me a 3x, and we also have a 1 plus 2, which will give me a 3. So on my left-hand side, I'm left with 3x plus 3, and that equals 36. All right, my variables are already all on that left. My variables are already on the left-hand side, so let's go ahead and subtract that 3. And we get that 3x equals 33. And my very last step is to undo that multiplication with division. We're going to divide by 3, and we get that x equals 11. Now, we have to make sure that we actually answer this question. It says, find the integers. We just found x, which is the first integer. Now we need our 3 consecutive integers. So 11 plus 1 is going to give me 12. And 11 plus 2 is going to give me 13. So my 3 consecutive integers whose sum is 36 is 11, 12, and 13. All right, here's our next problem. It says twice the sum of 3 consecutive odd integers is 54, and we need to find the integers. All right, so let's dissect this. If we have twice, that means that something needs to get multiplied by 2, okay? Typically, when we do something like twice the sum, we're going to do 2 followed by parentheses, and everything that follows is going to go in those parentheses, okay? Now, sum means addition, and then we have 3 consecutive odd integers. So in the previous example, we had consecutive integers like 1, 2, 3. When we talk about 3 consecutive odd integers, we're talking, for example, 1, 3, 5, maybe 7, 9, 11. So we're looking for 3 odd numbers in a row. If we call our first odd integer x, in order to get to the next odd integer, we actually have to add 2. So let's think about this. If I'm trying to go from 1 to 3, 1 plus 2 is what gets me to 3. Okay? So thinking again about 1, 3, and 5, in order for me to get from 1 to 5, I have to add 4. So my third consecutive odd integer is going to be written as x plus 4, okay? And that word is still means equals, and we know it's going to equal 54. So let's dissect this. We have twice the sum, so 2 followed by that set of parentheses, and now inside that parentheses, we need the sum of x plus x plus 2 plus x plus 4, and that's going to equal 54. So here's our initial setup. Now, inside those parentheses, we have a couple things we can combine. We've got x, x, and x again, which will give me a 3x. And then we also have 2 plus 4, which is going to give me a 6. So at this point, we have 2 times the quantity 3x plus 6, and that equals 54. All right, so let's deal with that 2 out front next. We could go ahead and distribute it if we like. We get 6x plus 12 equals 54. All those variables are already on the left, so we're going to take care of that 12 next by subtracting it. We get that 6x equals 42. We're going to undo that multiplication of 6 by dividing by 6, and we find out that x equals 7. 42 divided by 6 is 7. We didn't answer the question just yet, though. We have to find the integers. We found x, which is our first integer. Remember, we're looking for consecutive odd integers, so the next odd number would be 9, and that third odd number would be 11. So 7, 9, and 11. All right, this next one says the perimeter of a rectangle is 100 meters. If the length is 12 meters more than the width, find the length and the width of the rectangle. I think this one is helpful to have a picture. So let's go ahead and start by simply drawing a rectangle. Okay. And remember, perimeter is all the way around that rectangle, so we need to add up all the sides. Okay. And when I add up all the sides, we're going to find out that it is 100 meters. It says if the length is 12 meters more than the width. So let's dissect 12 meters more than the width. Okay. So my length, let's call length L. That word is means equals 12 meters more than the width. So we have 12 more than, we're going to add, and then we have that width, which we'll call W. Now, in my picture, let's go ahead and label this side L and this side W. Based on what we just dissected, though, we know that L is 12 more than my width. So in place of L, let's just write 12 plus W. So that means that the side on the top is also 12 plus W, and that side on the left is just plain old W. Okay, so now when we think about my perimeter, I'm going to add up all the sides, and it needs to equal 100. So my perimeter is 100 meters. All right, so that means that W plus 12 plus W plus W plus 12 plus W equals 100. Now, I literally just took all the sides and added them up. Another approach here would be to see that two sides are W, so we could write 2W, plus two sides are 12 plus W, so 2 times 12 plus W. This goes ahead and simplifies that equation a little bit more. Either way, in the next step, we'd end up with the same result once we start combining our like terms. Okay, so at this point, let's stick with the equation we just wrote. Let's go ahead and distribute that 2, and we get 2W plus 24 plus 2W equals 100. That 2W plus 2W, we can go ahead and combine to 4W plus 24 equals 100. All right, all my W's are already on the left-hand side. So let's subtract 24. We get 4W equals 76. And then we need to divide by 4. 76 divided by 4 gives me a width of 19. We haven't answered the question, though. It says find the length and the width of the rectangle. If we know that the width is 19, my length is 12 more than that. So my length is going to be 12 plus 19, which is going to give me a total of 31. Now, also keep in mind that this problem gives me units, which are meters. So really, we should have 19 meters and 31 meters for our two solutions. All right, last one here. We have a problem that says draw a triangle and label the interior angles as X, 3x and x plus 10, and we want to find their measures. Now, what's important to realize about this particular problem is that the sum of all the angles in a triangle equal 180 degrees. So let's make a little note of that. Sum of the angles in a triangle there we go, are 180 degrees. So if we think about what we have going on here, it tells us to draw a triangle. We have x, 3x, and x plus 10. It does not matter which angle you label as what, but you've got to make sure one of them is x, one of them is 3x, and one of them is x plus 10. And now we've got to use that knowledge that the sum of the angles in a triangle are 180 degrees. So this means that when I add up x, 3x, and x plus 10, that needs to equal 180. So my first angle, my second angle, and my third angle all have to add up to 180. Now, we do have some like terms. X, 3x, and x is actually going to give me a 5x plus 10 equals 180. Let's subtract that 10. We get 5x equals 170. We're going to divide by 5. And 170 divided by 5 actually gives me that x equals 34. It wants me to find all the measures of the triangle though. So while I got that x equals 34 is my first angle, I also have to find out what 3x is and x plus 10 is. So 3x would be 3 times 34, which is 102 degrees. And then my last one, I need to do x plus 10. So 34 plus 10, which is going to give me 44 degrees. So we find out that my three angles end up being 34 degrees, 102 degrees, and 44 degrees. All right, I hope this video helped you finish off 3.2, and we'll pick up on 3.3 next. Have a great day. Bye.